Have you ever noticed that the deeper your thoughts become, the further you drift from everyone around you? That the more you question, the more people pull away, not because you're arrogant or wrong, but because your very presence makes them uncomfortable? You speak carefully. You think deeply. You try to connect, but somehow the room grows colder. Eyes glaze over, conversations turn shallow, and you're left wondering if you're the problem, or if you're simply seeing something others are still trying to avoid. This isn't social anxiety. This isn't a personality flaw. This is what happens when intelligence crosses a line society was never designed to accept. In this video, we're going to explore why people who think deeply often find themselves walking alone. We'll dive into the psychological and neurological reasons society fears solitary intelligence, not because it's broken, but because it threatens the tribal mind. You'll see why solitude becomes necessary, not as an escape, but as a form of cognitive survival. You'll discover why thinkers like Jung, Nietzsche, Kierkegaard, and Schopenhauer believed that walking alone wasn't weakness, it was the price of awakening. And most importantly, you'll understand why the more your thoughts evolve, the less space there is for you in a world built to reward conformity over clarity. This isn't just a philosophy lesson, it's a mirror. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own life, if you've ever been punished for seeing too clearly, if you've ever been made to feel wrong for wanting depth in a world addicted to noise, then don't look away, because what you'll find in this solitude might not only explain your isolation, it might finally make it feel earned. Most people don't realize this, but intelligence isn't threatening because it's superior. It's threatening because it's reflective. When someone walks into a room with more money, more beauty, or more status, we may feel envy, but we still function. But when someone walks in with more awareness, more clarity of thought, something shifts. Their presence alone becomes a psychological disruption. It forces others to unconsciously compare who they are to what they're not. This is what psychologists call the mirror effect. When someone's depth silently reflects back the shallowness we'd rather ignore. It's not arrogance, it's not condescension, it's the fact that intelligence makes people feel seen in ways they didn't consent to. Carl Jung warned of this dynamic when he wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." Deep thinkers are walking catalysts. They stir unconscious defense mechanisms, not by challenging others directly, but simply by existing in a way that contradicts surface-level living. Their silence can be louder than most people's words because it radiates internal coherence. Neuroscience supports this phenomenon. A study published in Social Cognitive and Affective Neuroscience found that the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, is activated not only by physical threats, but by social and psychological threats, such as exclusion, rejection, or perceived inferiority. In fact, this same region lights up when people encounter social comparison scenarios, especially when they feel outperformed intellectually or morally. This means that being near a highly intelligent person can literally trigger the brain's fear response in others, not because the thinker is doing anything wrong, but because they unconsciously challenge the social equilibrium. Schopenhauer saw this long before the fMRI machine existed. He wrote, "A high degree of intellect tends to make a man unsocial, not because the intelligent person lacks empathy, but because their mind functions outside the bandwidth of most collective thinking." And as Kierkegaard observed, the crowd is untruth. To think beyond the crowd is to unsettle it. In the end, people don't reject deep thinkers because they're wrong. They reject them because deep thinkers accidentally hold up a mirror, and most people aren't ready to look. Deep thinkers don't choose solitude because they hate people. They choose it because constant interaction dilutes the mind. In any social setting, even a one-on-one conversation, a part of your brain is constantly engaged in impression management. Am I being understood? Do I sound normal? Should I say this out loud? This isn't a flaw, it's a deeply wired survival instinct. But for the intelligent mind, it's intellectual friction, a tax on cognition. Modern neuroscience confirms this. A 2023 study published in Nature Communications revealed that social interaction disrupts sustained attention and working memory, especially in individuals with high cognitive load. The researchers found that even brief interruptions from conversation reset the prefrontal cortex's task focus, reducing depth of processing and long-term retention. Put simply, Thinking deeply and being socially present use the same neural bandwidth. This is why thinkers, from Pascal to Virginia Woolf, have described solitude not as luxury, but as mental necessity. Philosopher Soren Kierkegaard understood this tension over 150 years ago. "The crowd is untruth," he wrote. "Truth rests with the individual." He wasn't promoting narcissism. He was warning that truth cannot survive where performance dominates perception. And society is by nature performance. When intelligent people withdraw, it's not escapism, it's cognitive protection. They know that meaningful insight, creative synthesis, and authentic thought demand long, uninterrupted stretches of mental space, something society rarely allows. Solitude isn't where deep thinkers go to hide, it's where they go to fully arrive, to themselves, their thoughts, and the truths too fragile to survive the noise of daily interaction. They're not avoiding people, they're recovering the parts of themselves that only exist when no one's watching. At first, solitude is a tactic, a way to reclaim focus, a quiet refusal of the noise. But for the deep thinkers, solitude doesn't stay quiet. It deepens, it sharpens, and eventually it transforms. When the mind is stripped of distractions, conversations, algorithms, and ambient validation, something happens that few people are prepared for. You don't find peace, you find yourself, unmasked, unfiltered, unnervingly raw. This is the moment Soren Kierkegaard called dread. Not fear of an external threat, but a deep, internal vertigo. The dizzying realization that you are utterly responsible for your own existence. There is no longer a crowd to lean on, no borrowed opinions to hide behind, no script to read from. Just the abyss of freedom and the terror of choosing without guarantees. Kierkegaard believed this confrontation is the threshold to authenticity, but he also warned most people turn back. Because it's easier to stay inside the performance of life than to stare into the silence and ask, "Who am I without it?" Carl Jung described this process as individuation, the painful birth of the true self through confrontation with the unconscious. He wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." In solitude, the intelligent mind doesn't just think, it descends. It meets every unexamined belief, every inherited expectation, every repressed emotion. And if it goes far enough, it meets the one thing most people spend their lives avoiding, the void at the center of the self. It's here that Nietzsche's thought experiment becomes a challenge. What if a demon crept after you one night and said, "This life, as you now live it, you must live once more and innumerable times more"? Would you accept that fate? Would you be proud of the thoughts you carry into eternity? Or would you feel horror because you've never actually chosen your life? This is the existential threshold. Once crossed, there's no going back. You can't rejoin the group with the same ease. You can't laugh at what once distracted you. You can't pretend you didn't see what solitude revealed. That's why, for deep thinkers, solitude is not relief, it's initiation. Not silence, but confrontation. Not escape, but emergence. And what emerges may not be comfortable, but it's real. Human evolution did not select for truth, it selected for survival. And survival, for 99% of our evolutionary history, depended on one thing: belonging to the tribe. To be isolated was to be vulnerable. Alone meant dead. That's why the human brain developed not to reward truth, but to reward agreement, not insight, but acceptance. Modern neuroscience confirms this. When people are exposed to ideas that challenge their beliefs, the amygdala, the brain's fear center, activates as if facing physical danger. A 2016 fMRI study published in Nature Scientific Reports showed that political or identity-threatening information lights up neural circuits associated with self-preservation, not critical thinking. This means the average person literally experiences deep thinking as a biological threat. So when the intelligent mind introduces complexity into a social environment, the tribe doesn't see it as curiosity, it sees it as conflict. The tribe wants harmony, not honesty. It wants repetition, not revelation. This is why status quo bias dominates. People prefer familiar lies over disruptive truths. It's why the Dunning-Kruger effect thrives. Those who know least often feel most certain, while those who know more are burdened with doubt. And it's why cognitive dissonance leads people to reject information not because it's false, but because it would force them to rethink who they are. In this environment, intelligence becomes a liability. Especially today, in the age of social media, where virality depends on clarity, brevity, and emotional simplicity, deep thinkers are structurally disadvantaged. Algorithms reward certainty, not nuance. Controversy spreads faster than complexity, and outrage beats reflection every time. This is why intelligence, real intelligence, is antiviral. It moves slowly, it asks unsettling questions, it demands silence. And in a world built for dopamine, noise, and validation, silence is the new heresy. The intelligent person becomes the outsider not by choice, but because the tribe cannot metabolize what they see. Not yet. Not all withdrawals are acts of escape. Some are acts of preservation. Arthur Schopenhauer believed that intelligence demanded isolation not out of elitism, but out of necessity. He called it the economy of attention, the recognition that mental energy is finite, and that most social interactions are cognitively expensive, but intellectually bankrupt. Modern neuroscience backs this up. Every decision we make, every social cue we process, every emotional tone we regulate, consumes mental bandwidth. According to psychologist Roy Baumeister, the phenomenon of decision fatigue shows how the brain's capacity to make high-quality decisions depletes throughout the day. Meanwhile, researchers like Sophie Leroy have shown that even momentary social interruptions create attentional residue, mental leftovers that reduce deep focus. So what happens when the intelligent person begins to calculate the true cost of constant interaction? They realize something terrifying. Most conversations burn calories of cognition but return nothing. Most networking is signal, not substance. Most social obligations are anti-thought rituals, designed to sustain cohesion, not clarity. Soren Kierkegaard warned against becoming a public character, someone whose thoughts are shaped by what others want to hear. He feared that being too visible meant thinking too shallowly. He wrote, "The crowd is untruth. This isn't misanthropy, it's conservation." Deep thinkers understand that their most precious asset is not time, but awareness. And awareness, like any currency, can be wasted. That's why they opt out from trivial meetings, from surface-level debates, from groupthink echo chambers. They're not being aloof, they're protecting their clarity, because that clarity is the wellspring of every meaningful insight they'll ever produce. And here's the paradox. To give something genuinely valuable to society, they must first turn away from it. They don't retreat because they hate the world. They retreat to preserve the cognitive purity required to change it. What happens when an intelligent person is alone long enough? Not lonely, truly alone. Not distracted, not validated, not performing, just present, immersed in the silent company of their own mind. Something starts to shift. The noise of the world fades, and in its absence, patterns emerge. Patterns that were invisible amid the constant simulation of social life. Arthur Schopenhauer called solitude the fountain of clarity, but for many it feels like a void. Why? Because society trains us to see stillness as lack, not presence. Yet for the intelligent mind, solitude is the only place where the world begins to make sense. From this quiet vantage point, our rituals begin to crack. You notice that most conversations are not dialogues, but mutually reinforcing loops. People rehearsing beliefs they've never examined, trading identity tokens rather than insight. You begin to see that mass culture isn't culture, it's anesthesia. A curated flood of narratives designed not to awaken, but to comfort and distract. The intelligent person sees that the more socially embedded a truth is, the less likely it is to be questioned. In solitude, those illusions lose power, and with that loss comes a kind of dangerous lucidity. Friedrich Nietzsche once said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." But solitude doesn't just reveal the how, it forces you to invent the why. It demands an existential reckoning. Who are you when no one is watching? What remains of you when you're no longer being mirrored by others? This is why solitude is feared, not because it's empty, but because it's full of undeniable truth. And once you see those truths, you can't unsee them. That's the real cost of solitude. You outgrow the game. You see that much of what passes for connection is performance, that many values are inherited, not chosen, that society isn't built for wholeness, but for compliance. And in that moment, you realize solitude isn't a detour from life. It's the only place you ever really encounter it. All truth passes through 3 stages. First, it is ridiculed. Second, it is violently opposed. Third, it is accepted as being self-evident. What do Socrates, Galileo, Tesla, Hypatia, and Turing have in common? They were not just geniuses. They were punished for seeing too clearly, too soon. This is not poetic exaggeration. It's a pattern, repeated so often throughout history, it can no longer be dismissed as coincidence. Socrates was executed for corrupting the youth. His real crime? Teaching people how to think critically, to question authority, and live examined lives. He could have escaped. Instead, he chose to drink the hemlock, a final act of philosophical defiance against an unthinking society. Galileo was placed under house arrest by the Catholic Church, not for heresy, but for showing the world that Earth isn't the center of the universe. In doing so, he displaced human ego from the cosmos, and for that he was silenced. Nikola Tesla died alone, penniless and forgotten, not because his ideas lacked merit, but because they lacked profitability. His vision of free energy was too radical for the industrialists who owned the world's wires. The system didn't reward genius, it punished it for not being monetizable. Hypatia of Alexandria was a woman centuries ahead of her time. A philosopher, mathematician, and astronomer, she was brutally murdered by a religious mob, not for her errors, but for her clarity. Her death marked the collapse of classical knowledge into a new dark age. Alan Turing helped end World War II by cracking the Enigma code. He fathered modern computing, the very technology through which you're watching this. And yet, for his sexuality, he was chemically castrated. He died by suicide at age 41. Their shared crime? They thought beyond what the tribe could tolerate. Each saw through illusions society wasn't ready to lose. Each revealed truths that destabilized power, undermined dogma, or simply made others uncomfortable. These weren't fringe thinkers. They were the pillars of progress. And yet, their legacies were only honored after their lives were erased. The lesson? Society doesn't fear intelligence, it fears what intelligence reveals. And history shows, it will do anything to silence it. When the world rejects your depth, the instinct is either to go silent or to shout louder. But there's a third path, quieter, stranger, and more powerful. It begins with solitude, not as punishment, but as sanctuary. Friedrich Nietzsche saw solitude not as isolation, but as the crucible of becoming. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he writes, "He who cannot endure solitude does not truly love freedom." To Nietzsche, solitude was the furnace where the Übermensch, the one who transcends mass morality, is forged. You don't escape society to disappear, you do it to return transformed. Still, living with forbidden intelligence means learning when to speak and when to stay silent. Soren Kierkegaard warned against sharing what the world isn't ready to receive. Paraphrasing the gospel, he wrote, "Do not cast pearls before swine." Sharing your deepest ideas with the wrong audience doesn't make you brave, it makes your insights vulnerable to distortion. Protect what's sacred by choosing where you reveal it. But this doesn't mean you must be alone. The most powerful connections often happen across time, not space. In books, journals, and ideas passed through centuries, you find invisible allies. Plato, Jung, Camus. Intellectual solitude is never empty when it's shared with the dead who understood you before you were born. And perhaps the final task, translation. As Einstein once said, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. Learn to translate your depth into clarity, not to water it down, but to build a narrow bridge from your mind to theirs. Even if only one person crosses, you've expanded the world. To live with forbidden intelligence is to walk a knife's edge, unseen, misunderstood, and often alone. But if you walk it consciously, you don't just survive, you become the map for those who come next. If you've ever felt like your thoughts are too heavy for the room, too strange, too deep, too unspeakable, know this: you're not broken. You're tuned to a frequency most people can't hear yet. This world was not built for those who question its foundations, but some of us were born with the unbearable urge to do just that. To see clearly is painful, to remain blind is worse. That tension, that exile, is the price of forbidden intelligence. But in your silence, you are sharpening insight. In your solitude, you are building what cannot be built in noise. You are not lost, you are becoming. The higher we soar, the smaller we appear to those who cannot fly. If this awakens something in you, tell me in the comments. And if you think differently and dare to stay that way, subscribe. This space was made for you.